Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be talking about hydrogen bonding and the importance of hydrogen bonding in characteristics of water. So hydrogen bonds are bonds that form between different polar molecules. So remember, we have polar covalent bonds and in those bonds a portion of the molecule is going to be partially positively charged, and then another one is going to be partially negatively charged. So here's an example of a polar covalently bonded molecule. This is water. So oxygen, because those electrons sit closer to the oxygen nucleus, oxygen gets that partially negative charge and the hydrogen get partial positive charges. And so what happens is, because positives and negatives are attracted to each other, we get this little bond here. It's very weak. It's a weak individual bond, but when you have multiple bonds, it can become a very strong bonded substance. And that's what we see in water. So all cells, or our first cells, I won't say all cell, but first cells that evolved in water. So living things evolved in water. And we also know that all living things are composed of about 70 to 90% water. Water is polar, and again, I'll draw it so you see those bonds, and the electrons sit way up here by the oxygen, which makes this partially negative and these partially positive. All right, so there are some unique characteristics about this polar molecule. Because it's polar and because water is hydrogen bonded to other water molecules, water has unique characteristics that make it necessary for all living things. Water is inorganic, but it is inorganic. It's one inorganic molecule that all living things need. So due to the hydrogen bonding, water can still remain liquid at 0 degrees Celsius. That's when it starts to form solid, okay? Water becomes gas vapor at 100 degrees Celsius. If there was no hydrogen bonding, then water would still be a liquid at negative 100 degrees Celsius and would become a gas at negative 91 degrees Celsius. So these hydrogen bonds give water unique properties. And so one of the first properties is water has a high heat capacity. So it takes a lot of energy to raise water by 1 degree Celsius. And what that means is you're not going to have big temperature fluctuations, which means animals that live in water aren't going to go from 60 degrees Celsius to 90 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius to 10 degrees Celsius at different because of air temperature. Water remains relatively stable. So it might be in the wintertime, it might get down to 50 degrees or 40 degrees Celsius. Oh, wait, Celsius. I don't know what I'm saying, 50 or 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It might be 10 degrees Celsius or even a little lower, but it's not going to be freezing. And the water stays that same temperature throughout the entire winter. And then in the summer, when it's 100 degrees outside, Fahrenheit again, not Celsius, so 40 degrees Celsius outside, water might only get up to about 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees Celsius. And so this is also important for us. Our body temperature is about 37 degrees Celsius or 97 degrees Fahrenheit, 98 degrees Fahrenheit, right around there. And our body temperature doesn't fluctuate. When we exercise, we release that heat from the body, but our body doesn't move up and get super, super hot. Our body doesn't get really, really cold when we go outside in the winter either. So those are things that are beneficial about the fact that water doesn't change or fluctuate in temperature. And that's all due to the hydrogen bonding. High heat evaporation. What this means is when water evaporates, it takes a lot of energy for water to evaporate. And that energy, as it evaporates, pulls the heat away as well. So the evaporating water cools the surface. So you get a lot of energy released in the form of heat. And so this is kind of what I was talking about. When your body starts to heat up due to exercise or fever, we have certain characteristics. Specifically, we have a homeostatic mechanism that is put into place that will keep us from increasing in temperature. So the blood and our body cells don't heat up super fast, but when they start to get warmer, immediately homeostatic mechanisms come into play. The hypothalamus sends a signal to our sweat glands. Our sweat glands start releasing sweat. Our blood vessels dilate to bring the heat to the surface of the skin, which also causes our skin to become red or flushed. And then as that heat hits the surface and the sweat evaporates, it pulls that heat away. So this is another benefit of those hydrogen bonds. Water is a universal solvent. So water dissolves all polar molecules, and you always hear M&Ms don't melt in your hands, they melt in your mouth, because we have water in our mouth, in our saliva. And so here you see M&Ms in a glass, and you can see that candy coating is melting off. So that's universal solvent. Any polar molecules can dissolve other polar molecules. Water cannot dissolve fatty molecules. So if it's nonpolar, like a fat, water can't dissolve it. And you can see that when you're having like a salt and vinegar I think it's salt and vinegar type dressings where you have, or maybe it's vinegar and oil dressings. I don't know why I said salt and vinegar. I think that's a chip, actually. Vinegar and oil dressings, when you mix them up, the water is going to, is heavier, so it's going to go to the bottom, and the fat is going to float at the top. And you'll see that as they separate. And this is your figure showing just a little tablet, a color tablet, that is then changing the color of the water, because water, again, is a universal solvent for all polar molecules. Water is cohesive and water is adhesive. Cohesion means water sticks to itself. So the hydrogen bonds between water allow water to stick together. And so as water flows through our veins or our arteries, it stays together, which brings other molecules with it. Same thing happens as water is absorbed through the roots of plants. Because water is being absorbed, it's being pulled up through their vessels, through their vascular system. And it's going to get to the areas that need the water. Water is also adhesive. So adhesion means water sticks to other substances. It can stick to nutrients. It can stick to the side of a glass. So water sticks to other things and can pull those things along as well. Water has a high surface tension. What that means is the bonds in water go in all directions, and they end up pushing the outer region of the water into a very tight structure. So the middle bonds of the water molecule tend to be very strong, and they can hold things so it looks like insects are walking on water. So surface tension is important also in breathing. So if because water has such high surface tension, every time we take a breath and our lungs deflate, so we take a breath in, our lungs inflate, and then when we breathe out, our lungs deflate. The structures in our lungs that allow air to move across into the blood, so oxygen to move across, diffusion process, those structures, they will fold in on themselves. So basically they collapse, right? Because of that, if we didn't have any protective chemicals in our lungs themselves would completely collapse and we wouldn't be able to breathe. So this high surface tension actually could be potentially harmful, but our cells produce a chemical that's called surfactant, which is kind of like, I always think of it as like a dish soap. Think of dish soap. Dish soap keeps things from collapsing in on themselves. If you take a piece of like paper, have you ever had, probably most people don't write notes anymore, but I know in the 1980s, when I was in school, we used to write notes. And then we'd fold them up into little cute squares or triangles, whatever, and then we'd pass them in the hallway. And that's how we talked, because we didn't have cell phones back then. So when we got home, we'd have these notes in our pockets, and sometimes we'd forget to take them out, and we'd put our pants in the laundry. They'd go through the washer, and then we'd find them. As we were pulling them out of the washer, we were like, what is this in my pocket? And it's this very wet piece of paper. And if you try to open that wet piece of paper, it's going to tear. So it's something fun that you could try right now if you wanted. Take a piece of paper and get it really, really wet and fold it up into a few, just fold it a few times, maybe make a little triangle, whatever. Then open it. See how easy it is after it's been sitting to open. A lot of times when you try to open it, you're going to rip the paper. This happens with dollars as well. And this also, so it happens with dollars, but that's something you can see. But in our lungs, it would happen with our structures called alveoli. But surfactant keeps our lungs from tearing, our lung tissue from tearing, and allows them to re-inflate with the next breath. So if you take that same piece of paper and you put some dish soap on it, rub it around, and then get it really, really wet with water, super wet, and then you fold it up, and then in 10 minutes try to open it, you're not going to tear it as easily, or hopefully you don't tear it at all. That's what surfactant does. And actually, if you've ever heard of children having problems with breathing because they were born prematurely, that's because our lungs are one of the last organs to maturate, and they aren't producing that surfactant. And that's what causes a lot of the lung problems in premature infants. And the last characteristic about water is less dense as ice than it is as a liquid. And what this does is it allows the surface of water to freeze, but the water deep in the lakes or the oceans are still able to have animals swim around. And so here you can see ice is 0 degrees Celsius. Like I said, water starts to freeze at 0 degrees. Air temp is -20. So this would be very bad for any animals in the water. But the water under the ice is going to be warmer. And it actually keeps the water below the ice warmer. So that's kind of nice. So I'm done with this lecture. I will get into the next part of this chapter in our next video. Have a great day. Bye.